right. Hey, everybody. Welcome. I am so excited to be here with you all and here with Kyle tonight or in the morning from wherever you're joining us from. I can
Yep.
tell you we have people from, I think when I last looked, more than 20 different countries from around the world joining in. And so that I think is really, really awesome. And so today we are going to be talking about a very important topic. Building AI literacy across K through 12 and even thinking beyond that. But
Mhm.
first, we'll do some introductions. Kyle, I'm going to kick it to you first to go ahead
Uh,
and introduce yourself, and then I'll come back to me for this
okay.
one.
So my name is Kyle Brumby. I spent my lifetime in education, 20 years as a classroom teacher, but then I kind of got sidetracked and moved into the technology realm. And I spent probably 15 years as a tech director, tech coordinator, but I also did a lot of professional development sessions. I've built maker spaces. I've done kind of all the different things that you can do in the kind of nexus of education and technology. And so AI became a natural place for me to move into as AI became more and more prevalent. Um, Part of what I've done is, we built out a process for the teachers in the district that I worked in most recently. I'm luckily that I've been able to retire from that position, and now I'm starting to do other things with my professional life. But I have a multitude of those different kinds of experiences.
Yeah, well, it is great to be here with you to talk about this tonight. And also, hopefully, people will share ideas, ask questions on all of the different spaces where we are streaming because we are streaming on Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter or X, or as I call it, Twix and YouTube.
Mhm.
And so, thank you, Cal, for sharing your experience. For everybody listening and joining in, I am Rochelle Dene Poth. I do a lot of things in education. I'm a long time educator, I've started to say, of Spanish and French and a STEAM emerging technology course, of which 7 of the past years and counting have focused on teaching about AI in my classroom. Also, an attorney, an author, speaker. You can connect with me on pretty much all the socials, and I love learning. And so I'm excited to learn from Kyle as we have this conversation today, and also from everybody that's joining in. And so we have some questions lined up that we will be discussing together. But we're also going to turn the tables a little bit and hope that you will share some of your insights and experiences as well. And then I can share that with everybody that's joining in. So I'm going to kick us off here. But one other thing I will say is if you just so happened to come across us talking live here today and you would like the recording and the resources that will be shared, at the bottom of the screen, you can see the tiny URL and you can fill out that form. And I will make sure that you get the recording, the resources, and everything else that you need from our conversation today. So I will go ahead and leave that there for a little bit. And also, I will drop that into the comments here momentarily. But first, going back to the focus of our conversation today is on AI literacy. And I know I've heard a lot of people talking about AI literacy. And Kyle, I'm sure you've heard a lot of people, right, throwing out AI literacy more and more so, right? Especially
Mhm.
where you're located. And this is not really one of the first questions, but I'm just curious, being that you are in California, do
Yeah.
you hear about it a lot more than maybe me, who is totally on the opposite coast from you?
Actually not. So what we hear is just the little bits and pieces, drips and drabs. And one of the things that I picked up and was very common to the experience that you had that you mentioned to when we talked previously is that we have some people that are diving in with, you know, both feet ready to go. And then there's a group that are very reticent that are kind of, I don't know if I'm quite ready for that. And so I think we have all these different people across the continuum, and I think we need to meet people where they're at and find ways to support their growth and not say everybody has to be at a certain place, but how do you grow slowly and sequentially so that you can start to use the AI tools first by yourself, I think, and then kind of bring them into your work with students.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always, when I speak about AI, a lot of times, sometimes I forget where I'm actually speaking because I was in Los Angeles in the summer speaking at well, actually, it was in September this year. Last year, it was in August, and speaking about AI as I had been. And I said, well, do you know that in California? And I got this look and I went, wait. I'm actually in California right now. So the research I've done, a lot of things that I've come across have been speaking about the activities that are happening, the movement that's being done in California, especially when it comes to literacy and K through 12 education. So that's why I always ask when I know that somebody is from of one of the first two states to start enacting policies and guidelines, California being one of those two at the end of 2023. I'm always curious to hear about the work that's being done. And so we do have some people joining in. So saying hello. I'll put some of your comments on the screen as we go. But first, I would like to ask this question. And this question goes out to everybody who's watching and also to Kyle and myself. And it's, how do you define AI literacy? Because back in April, I was in San Diego at the ASU GSV AI Summit Symposium. I forget which it was called this year, but that term started to come up even more. And there was a session that I was part of, and a question was asked, how many of you have heard AI literacy? And all the hands went up. And then the next question was, how many of you can define AI literacy? And one hand went up. And so, this definition, how we define it, is going to probably be different for everybody. And Kyle, I'll defer to you first if you would like to share, how do you define AI literacy?
So it the way I define AI literacy is the ability to use the tool ethically and responsibly as a co-creator of content and not so much as the absolute creator of content. So I'd like to share just really quickly, if I can share a screen right here. Okay, and then, so this absolutely is a slide from a session that I did with Learning Genie last week. And so it's kind of how information literacy has changed. And from the age of Google, where it was a keyword search and learning how to use it, it's not always the first result that you get. It's, we're kind of in some ways starting to go back to well, if it's on the internet, it has to be true. And right. And there's some people that kind of, well, it came from AI, so it must be true. So, but yeah, I think you need to treat AI with a critical mind. You have to look for the bias and ask AI itself to evaluate the responses that it's giving you, and have that empathy and attribution of what you're really using it. So be transparent. I used AI to do this, and it helped me along this way. But this is my original work, and those are some of the things that I think we need to teach teachers. But then have those teachers transfer those skills to their students.
Yeah, and I love that you shared that, just like the visual and the information that it shares within it.
Yeah.
And it's so important. And so hopefully other people will share some comments with us. But I know that for me, whenever I've been talking about it, trying to not be very like a big robust description of it or a big definition.
Mhm.
And I know that it's going to evolve, but I kind of look at it as, what is AI? How does it work? Where do we see it?
Mhm.
What are the ways we can use it? I always say ethically, safely, responsibly. And then there's all these other things you could add on to that. But then also as technology advances, it's going to, of course, I think, expand the definition of it because of the different types of tools that are involved, or looking at, I mean, I do some sessions on AI in the law, and I get a lot of questions about data privacy, the ethical considerations of it. And so I think that the evolution of the definition of it is going to be more than just like from the initial, like, what do I do now that ChatGPT is here? Because like it can do everything, to people kind of settling into, okay, how do I use this tool in a way that is ethical, safe, responsible, is enhancing learning, to then building upon that, how am I going to take whatever this is that I'm using and use it as like a collaborator, as a thought partner, to boost some of those critical skills, and also knowing when to and when not to use AI. So there's a lot of literacies out there. And I had some conversations recently with some library media specialists and some administrators. And it's been interesting to say, well, we talked about media literacy and digital literacy and AI literacy. And even about 2 years ago, I had the opportunity, actually about a year and a half ago at this point, but two ISTE conferences ago, Kevin Roos, who's an author, had written a book called Future Proof. And in that book, he talked about like how we're constantly moving across this, digital literacy, media literacy, and he said digital discernment. And that was June of, well, he had written the book prior to that and I read it, but that resonated so much with me because I thought, you know what, like, that's right. It's not just about sorting through what information is accurate, misinformation, bias, all of those things. It's also looking at something and did a human write this? Was it created by a bot? Is it factual? Is it a real person? Like there is so much that we have to do. And being able to kind of like go through all of that, shout out to my dad, go through all of that is awesome as educators because it's keeping us learning, but it can be a little bit overwhelming at times too. And I will say that, as an educator and as somebody who loves learning, it's not just one more thing that's added on. There are little things that you can do along the way to kind of build those literacy skills in students. And Kyle, I'll go back to you before moving on to another question. But, in the work that you've done and people that you've spoken with, do you find that people are adjusting more now than say 6 months ago or a year
Hmm.
ago compared to almost now we're at the cusp of 3 years since
Yeah,
ChatGPT?
yeah, really 3 years. And so one of the things is that I get the question of, how do I really know? How do I really know? And I really like the process of turning the tables on the AI tool, which is putting in a prompt after you've gotten the original response of whatever the AI tool provides. What is your confidence level of this response? Can you provide specific resources or specific references to where you got this material and where you found it? And so
Mhm.
just doing those things and kind of turning the tables back on the AI tool now provides you with a whole lot more information of where that information is and how confident they are on whether it's accurate or not. And so I've done a prompt where it's like, tell me, break down each one of the pieces. How confident are you? Highly confident, confident, or somewhat confident about your response in these ways? And then so those things that I get the somewhat confident, those are the things I need to know I need to go back and check, right? And to be able to have those skills to actually use my information literacy skills from before to go on, is this valid? Is this accurate? Where did this come from?
Right. Yeah. And those are great things to think about. And the one other thing that I'm trying to think, it's been in the last couple of weeks, I've had the opportunity to do some different speaking opportunities like sessions with a small group of educators, some virtual sessions, some one-on-one conversations, same as you, same as all educators were involved in all these different conversations. And it's really great to have even a space like this with you and I have a conversation and people being able to access, professional development or to get some new ideas to think about because sometimes it's difficult to really wrap your mind around like, well, what do I do with this? How do I know it's accurate information and how do I use it for myself? How do I teach my students how to use it appropriately? And again, like luckily, now that we're almost 3 years out, we have hopefully in all of our schools or in our own personal options that we've chosen for ourselves found some ways to get some PD, to get some training, to have some guidance on this because it is, especially, it seems to me, and I don't know if anybody else agrees, but it seems like in the last 3 to 6 months for sure, that it is just moving and changing so quickly. Like I opened up something the other day and I had the option for it to just analyze this massive document. And I actually wanted to read the document. It was legalese, which I love to read, but Gemini popped up. I'm like, let me try this out. And I typed in a prompt and it did it, but I analyzed it. And then I went through and I found there were some inconsistencies, but nothing is perfect, but even still, it's not going away. And so it's that's one thing that I've heard is like, oh, it's gonna even 5 years ago, well, it's AI is great. Like it's been around since the middle of the last century. I don't really think it's going anywhere. So, okay, so we're going to go on to the next question. And for anybody joining again, please feel free, whatever platform you're watching from, drop your responses into the comments because they do show up for me here and I can share them with everybody else. Also, if you have questions too, feel free to drop those in. But we talk about misconceptions and what are some misconceptions, especially now that we're talking about AI, that you, Kyle, or
Right.
you, our viewers,
Hmm.
anybody sees, whether around students, colleagues, uh, anybody, because what I've said also is like, my hope is that as educators, obviously, if you're in the classroom, you're an administrator, however, whatever your role is, you're working with students, you're probably helping colleagues and your school community. But my hope is that students, when they're involved in learning about AI in our classrooms and educators as well, that they'll go home, they'll talk to family, they'll talk to friends, share some ideas, and serve to inform others. So I feel like, oh, we're educating the world at this point. But there are a lot of misconceptions. And so, what are some things that you are seeing in the work that you're doing? And I know that you're speaking and you're going to conferences. So, what can you share with us?
So one of the things I see, so when I talk to other educators, that they see students kind of offloading the cognitive part of what they're doing, that they feel like they can just put a prompt into ChatGPT and get that and really not need to go back and validate those sources or even to read through it so that they understand what that AI tool has provided for them. They just want to take it, okay, I'm going to offload my responsibility to that tool, and then I'm going to use that output and represent it as my own. So it basically becomes plagiarism, but we really haven't gone through the process of educating students and teachers really being able to use the tool, because that to me is the disconnect right now, is that we have lots of teachers who, like I mentioned, are all along the continuum, and we don't have, because I did a lot of work in information literacy, and there were very specific skills that came out. Can you do a site search? Can you search by country? Can you do some of those things on the internet? And we haven't quite gotten there yet with AI. That there hasn't been some very definitive ways to evaluate AI sources. I put a few out that I found that I really like, but there's not hasn't been anybody that's really created a curriculum for teachers that they can then pass on to students, where that's our disconnect yet. I mean, the one document that I will tell you that I really like is one from Common Sense Media that's called How LLMs Work. It's a one-page document. It does a very good job of explaining everything. And one of the first things I tell people when they're dealing with AI tools is that AI never wants to say, I don't know. It will fake it. And that is where your hallucinations come in. They always want to provide an answer. So if you go through it and something seems amiss, go back and check it. But I mean, even copy and paste and put it into another tool. So if you got it from Gemini, copy paste, put it into ChatGPT and see what you get. I mean, that's another way to kind of look at the two different models and what kind of information you're going to get from each model.
Yeah, and I'm going to go recency versus primacy on what you just said there because the one of the activities that I've done when I've done some trainings and I've done some that have been in person, virtual. I did one this summer, it was like 7.5 hours virtual. But one of the activities that I had done was taking a prompt and in small groups, like of 3 or 4, choosing different LLMs and seeing like, and evaluating like, what do you get from ChatGPT? What do you get from Gemini? What do you get from Claude? And kind of comparing. And some people choose, and I'm often asked, which one is your favorite? I'm like, well, I use them for different things. Like, I don't really have a favorite. I probably gravitate more towards like ChatGPT just because it knows me at this point. We have this ongoing understanding and knows my history, but it's fun to explore and just to be able to evaluate it to see, like, hypothetical example, like, oh, create a lesson plan for me without giving it anything else. What's the default amount of time it puts? How many lessons? Does it give you standards, differentiation, all of these different things? And so it's not the super answer to everything. And I will say, just I agree with. I'm listening to everything that you said before. One of the things is, and I think this comes with technology, is often and students educators, adults often think, oh, well, the technology is always correct, or this looks great. It's awesome. But we have these hallucinations. And it's been interesting in the last couple of months. I've heard several educators talk about how they really don't like the terminology of like hallucinations anymore. They say that it makes mistakes or it's inaccurate, which it's always interesting to keep like, oh, okay, why? In the different perspectives. The other thing is that, that if students are using AI, they feel like, and I've heard this from students that I've worked with in my own classroom, I've heard this from students as part of some other groups and some learning activities that I've done, where they truly tell me that, oh, well, I use ChatGPT to help me write this essay, and I got an A on my essay. And I'm like, but did you really get an A on your essay? Because you didn't write it. And if I take a day, a week, a month from now, and I ask you questions about that content, are you going to know it? Because just because you use the AI for it doesn't show that you actually, in fact, learned what you are maybe going to be held accountable for. And so that's another thing that comes up. And then another misconception is that, and I think this is shifting more as well, is that like, oh, you used AI, it's cheating, like that they were lined up evenly. And that comes down to having guidelines, policies, norms in use for in your classroom for like how you need to use it. Because the reality is, in the world of work, 80%, there was a survey earlier this year. I think it was like 3,000 different types of employers with over 1,000 different types of like work areas. And nearly 80% of those they surveyed said that hiring somebody that is skilled in AI is a priority for them by the year 2028. Well, newsflash, 2028 is not that far away at this point. So I think there are, as with all things, there will often be misconceptions. And I think the way we get around that is by not being afraid of whatever the technology is. And in this case, AI. And maybe you don't want to embrace it. Maybe it's like a high five, it's an acknowledgement like, yeah, okay, I know you're here. It's just a tool, and helping, to figure out like how to use this, because as educators, like we have to provide opportunities for students. And so before we go on to the next question, I'll just say, or I'll see, is there anything else that you wanted to add to that point about any misconceptions?
So I think one of the things is that I see a lot of teachers like wanting to dip their toe in the water, and the way they dip their toe in the water is to go to one of the tools, like a Magic School or some of these others, and say, okay, go to the drop downs. I want an English lesson for third grade for this subject area that hits these content standards. And
Mhm,
so they get something out, but to me, that just becomes another version of digital teacher pay teachers. It's a piece of curriculum that you're not bought into,
right.
right? That you really don't have. And I think there's other things. I know Curriculum Genie has this feature where you can take a lesson that you have and upload it into that,
Mhm,
and then have it do a light rewrite of that lesson, adding in some of those things. And I think it's a good thing for a lot of folks to be able to do, because then they can see what AI really does with content that they're familiar with. And
mhm,
so it's one of the things I want to share real quickly. This is another graphic that I pulled out. So the first graphic and this graphic, um, talking about adapting. So if you're using kind of this out of the box solution, you just
mhm,
don't have a disconnect. There's no connection to it. If you're adapting it, you have curriculum that you know, and you can
mhm,
see what AI is doing to that curriculum. And so I created this graphic and the graphics that I showed previously using AI. And it took
mhm.
me a little while to do that. Um, I went back and forth, and Rochelle, you and I actually talked about this, which is
Yeah.
you try to create an image using AI and it misspells everything. I mean, it goes through, and I had to go through, I want to say, 5 or 6 different iterations to get it to spell certain words correctly. And I had one more advanced graphic that I tried to create that I went back and forth one. And finally, Gemini said, I really tried. It apologized 4 or 5 times saying, I can't get it right. But then it finally says, you know what? I have to give up now. I can't get it
Mhm.
right.
That's I laugh whenever you talk about the images because you're right. Like I'll put in there, okay, this looks great. Don't change a thing. Just put this word, spell it correctly. That's it. And there are ways around it, but it would be so nice if it actually got the things correct. But it's also good for teaching because you can look at what an image is and say, okay, now looking at this, do you think this was professionally done by a graphic designer, for example? And then the students are like, no way, because like it didn't even spell artificial intelligence correctly or something. So yeah, lots of, and thanks for sharing your screen again and sharing some examples as well. There's just so much to unpack when it comes to this. And I'm going to say it over and over again, like it's not going away. It's increasing. And I'm sure anybody that whenever you log into your Gmail or anything, you see the little magic wand symbol or something that is AI related. And you're like, oh, what happens if I press this button? And, uh, and it's fun. And as educators, I think it's really important that we do dive in and explore, even if we're hesitant. And I love telling stories about educators who have told me I have no intention whatsoever of using AI, and they hadn't used ChatGPT. And this is this summer when I was doing some trainings, and I value hearing the why behind it. Like, why do you choose not to? And that was the point when I said, I'm not going to try to persuade you either way. The only thing I'm going to say is that this is an area where, regardless of how you may or may not feel about it, we are in the best position as educators to help to prepare our students for whatever's coming down the road in the future. And what better place than in our classrooms, even with the youngest learners, with or without the screens, because there's a lot of things they can understand what AI is, all the way up. And you don't have to be an expert. And, you mentioned a couple of tools, which ties into my next question, because there are a ton of tools that are out there. And I use a lot of them. Somebody asked me to pick one. I said, no, because there's a variety. And I understand the overwhelm that can happen when you have so many choices. But what I found, and you might probably agree with this as well, is like, I think it should be a base that you're using one like Gemini, ChatGPT, or one of the LLMs, and then finding some other tools that are great for you as an educator. They can also be placed in the hands of students, and having a little toolkit. And then if you find out it's not making an impact, it's not enhancing learning, then there's plenty of other options out there. But we as educators may know how to kind of make that distinction, or we're getting better at it. But what about our students? And here's the question here to everybody, not just Kyle and myself, but they are not necessarily sure. And I think back to when ChatGPT did come out, a fear that I had is that the students who were older students or had access for whatever reason to ChatGPT that started to use it, and or I had some that had paid for it, left school without knowing how to protect their information, putting in personally identifiable information and sharing that, lacking the skills that they need to be successful in career or going on to continue their education because they didn't have the guidance. But at the same point, educators, we were kind of like, well, what do we do now? Also, so how can we as educators, because we got a lot of things that we have to be responsible for, how can we help students figure this out, like when to use the tools, and understanding the reasoning or the data that's behind them?
So one of the things, or one of the documents that I would recommend to people, besides the Common Sense Media one, but I would also recommend to folks, is that Desert Sands School District. You talked about California and having different policies in place. Desert Sands School District in California has their basically their AI playbook that talks about their Rise platform. But the thing I really like about their document is that it has scenarios where teachers going to use this AI tool to write a recommendation letter for a student to get into college. So, what are the ethics around that practice? What are the things? Did that teacher include personally identifiable information in when they whatever they upload into a chat GPT or a Gemini? And so it kind of goes through that and it explains the process. And if you find the document, or somebody finds the document, it's in these light blue boxes throughout the document. So you can skim through the document and just find those scenarios, those kind of little vignettes of how students or how teachers would be using AI tools and what are the ethics around them.
I don't even think I can add to that answer. Like that was that was a great way of of explaining it for everybody out there. And the only thing that I could say, another thing is, and this comes back to, I bet about a year ago as well, is it kind of ties into this, the concept of, AI is cheating, which I mentioned with the misconceptions. And, you know, teachers, educators, I've been often asked, well, what is the best detector? And how do I know? And how do I prove it? And all of these things. And I say, well, you know what? You're the educator, you build the relationships, um, but there's also the accountability. And so when it comes to helping students understand, like, should I use this AI tool? Okay, great. So you used it. Okay, now without it, do you still have the information? Could you explain all of your reasoning? Did it support you or did it do the work for you? And also understanding where the information is coming from. And then, like you had mentioned before, also, compare the different models to see how the outputs will vary, because you can get very different things. And the other day when I used ChatGPT and also Gemini, and I put the same prompt in. I was asking it to evaluate something because I was just curious of how it would come out with what I was working with. And it was so interesting because the one was very like high level thinking, in depth questions. And I prompted it to say, like, generate, and I gave it the prompt. And then the other one was more like conversational, pleasant, the tone was very different. And it wasn't that I asked it like, please, and can you be nice and all of these kind of things to relate to it. But it was like that. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting, because the first one, I won't say which one was the more formal and which one was the more friendly one. But I thought, if I would use these and share these with somebody else or ask the questions to somebody, I think I would probably get some very interesting looks just by the wording of it. So I don't know, just kind of interesting for processing some of this information. But students definitely need opportunities. And that's one thing that I try to emphasize whenever I'm talking about or writing about AI is, I get it with especially elementary educators. I've heard a lot of them say, like, when do I find the time? And I always say, like, I don't know how you do all that you do. And they say that about high school educators too. Like, how do you do all that you do? But we're all doing and managing a lot of different things. But the biggest concern, and I kind of mentioned this a little bit, is like the over reliance on the technology and being on the screens, and of course finding the time. And I say, it doesn't have to involve the technology. There's little things, I call them like pop-up activities or pockets of activities. Some great videos out there. You've probably seen the one about how the father's trying to get the kids to teach him like basically what's an algorithm, and make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And the kids are so frustrated because they're telling him what to do, and he's following the instructions, but they're not being very specific, like an algorithm. And so the next question is, and I kind of, you know, gave you a little bit on that one. I started, but I'm going to kick it back to you. Is, what are some age appropriate ways that we can think about if you are an elementary educator or a library media specialist, or it doesn't matter what your role is, or even sometimes in physical education classes. I hear a lot from phys ed teachers that say, I don't really know what to do with this. I don't have the time, the resources. So what would you recommend to some educators that might be thinking this?
So, I mean, I'll go to the PE concept because actually I have training as a physical education teacher earlier on in my career. But so I think it would be the same use that teachers in academic subjects would. So you want to use AI to help you differentiate what your students are doing. So you have students at a variety of different skill levels in your class. How would I now differentiate the teaching of this skill to make it more understandable to students who are struggling? How would I further break down this skill to make it easier for students to complete? That to me is a great example of how to use AI tools in a physical education class. We do the same thing with an academic teacher. I always like to tell teachers that an AI tool is like your sous chef, right? It's there to help you along. You know the content, you know the curriculum, you know the kids. If you need to differentiate, you can ask it. So what you require from the AI tool is Are you going to give me that extra ingredient? Are you going to let me salt and pepper my lesson to taste? Are you going to give me some of those other things that I can use to make that lesson better? So one of the things that I can tell you is that Learning Genie does have a series of AI lessons or units that they have them set up. I believe the first one's like K3, and then more like a 4 through 8, and then a high school level one. And the thing I really liked about their curriculum, and I think I can share that screen real quickly again.
Hmm.
Um,
Oh, let me.
I think I'm
There we
okay.
go.
There we go. So,
Okay.
so, and I'm kind of going through this. So it's kind of this AI all around us. So they talk about things that are AI that kids of that age may not know. Like they give you kind of the little picture of of a Roomba and robots
Mhm.
and how they interact with us with all the different things that we do on a daily basis. And then the 3-5 or the 3-6 curriculum is, how do algorithms work? What is the difference, or how do robots and humans interact? And then
Mhm.
it does get into what is machine learning, and then how does machine learning turn into an LLM, and that what does that process look like? And it asks students to go through and identify all the steps in that process so that
Mhm.
they can see how it comes from just data to machine learning to an LLM to a generative AI model. And then your 7 to 12 curriculum. And I really like this because at the end of it, at the end of the third week, it kind of does the same thing with machine learning and gives them that depth. But then it asks them the last week to create a public service announcement for an AI tool? And what would they tell people of why they should use this tool, and what are the safeguards, or what are the things that they need to be aware of in using any artificial intelligence tool? And I think that's really key for kids to be
Mhm.
able to understand that process. And so that PSA, I think that's a great assignment for kids to use.
Yeah, and I love that you shared those lessons that are available for free for people to use
Yeah.
because it's that continuity of the content and it's starting with the building blocks of what it is. And when I when I started to research AI back in July of 2017 to write an article for January of 2018 because I've been writing about things that were very comfortable for me and it was easy to do. And then I had a lot of misconceptions of my own about what AI was. And that's a fun thing that I do in my class with students and in sessions that I do. Like, what's the first thing that you think of? And that answer has changed dramatically over the years from what used to be like Terminator and a lot of things to, ChatGPT or plagiarism cheating. But then there's also some very positive things as well. But I have heard from educators, especially looking for, a resource and not having to go to a bunch of different resources. And so sharing that they have the lessons for K through 12 and then the number of lessons and the time, and it's available for free. So you have that continuity. So you're in your school, you say, oh, well, this is great. Go to Learning Genie. It's already there on the site. Oh, and by the way, you can use it to create all of these other things, which when I have shared it, when I started to use it, I had that whole, like the first time I used ChatGPT, the wow factor, like, whoa, like what just happened here? Because I have assessments, differentiation, I got slides, I have all the things that you need. And again, like you don't need to have a ton of tools. You need some robust tools. You have specific needs. Maybe you're looking at things like UDL or Portrait of a Graduate, which has been a huge part of conversations in the past year. It's been increasing, and even more recently for me. But the only other I'll say about like foundational concepts is, things that those lessons that you just shared would address. And the basics, like I said, like algorithms, getting students to understand what pattern recognition is, look at the limitations of AI, and then just building. And I always like to say, you know, in elementary to middle to high school, thinking about getting them to understand it. So they are primarily the consumers. And then the older they get, like, then they're creators and then they become the innovators and who knows, and they become the entrepreneurs, because I have met some high school students that have, in fact, created these apps that are AI apps, some for student use, some for educator use. And it's just amazing. But over that span of time, having these lessons that are available to use, that you don't have to take all of that time on your own to find resources, to vet them, to know what's really going to be effective. And so it's great that that's available. And so for anybody that is watching now or in the recording, you will have access to all of the different links that we can share with you. So moving on a little bit here, the next thing that I want to talk about are partnerships. And this is something that I've seen be really impactful in so many different ways over the past, many years, but specifically about 4 years ago, I'll just say really quickly, there was a program that was based from one of the branch campuses affiliated with Penn State University here in Pennsylvania, and it had a cohort of 14 different local schools. And I even wrote an article about this, and they had a program called Belong in STEM. And what happened during that time was, on 4 different Saturdays, students, it was a free program for them, signed up, they came in, they learned about, and they had guest speakers about augmented virtual reality, about coding, about AI. And then they went on to site visits at local industries and businesses to see how some of these technologies were being used. And it was, some of these students were like 8 or 9 years old, up to say 16. A lot of them didn't know each other. They came from different schools. And then in the summer, they had 4 days where they met up together and still had a little bit of that content, but they had to then choose one of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and get into a group and use one of these technologies to figure out a solution to the problem. And so it was really neat to see how, you had the university involved, you got the different schools involved, we had the different industries, we had some ed tech companies based out of Pittsburgh and elsewhere coming together to help students see, like, that applicability and that real world relevance of what they're learning about. And so that's my experience. But Kyle, what about for you? What partnerships do you suggest, or what do you think is something that would be really beneficial if schools are thinking, like, how to really expand and bring, connect that school, the home, and the whole school community, and even on a global scale?
And so I can actually turn that back the clock almost 20 years. So one of the things that I did when I was a high school teacher and a tech coordinator is we actually created a course called Global Communications to teach students how to be better consumers of information on the internet. And I think there are courses like that that can kind of spring up that are very entrepreneurial, that you look for connections to the community. I would look for connections to either like senior citizens groups in your community. And can you teach them? What can you do, to support the local park and recs department? All of those things, I think, are partnerships that are available that are a light lift, right? That is not a huge lift for students and or their teachers that kind of organize and get that going locally. I would encourage students to go out and look and say, where can I make a difference using these tools, and how can I bring this information to more people so that they can effectively use those tools in their own life?
Yeah, I love all parts of that. And that is, the things that came to mind, like universities, the community, and then just even having, students try to explore and find out, like, are there local businesses that are using AI, or even a school itself creating. I've spoken to some different schools recently where they have, like, educators on an AI task force, and then they have a student version of that. And the students are involved in looking for activities in the community. They're doing after school programs. They're also investigating places in the workforce where AI might be needed. And I love the word authenticity, and I use it so often. And so I think that whenever you can find those opportunities and form those partnerships, then that authenticity of what they're learning, and the students see, okay, I'm learning about this in my 8th grade STEAM class, or we're talking about AI in my phys ed class or whatever the class may be, whatever grade level. And then they're connecting with, real world, as we say, and preparing for the future focus, future ready, however you want to term it. But it is definitely an area that is continuing to grow, and we can't hide from it. I know that for sure. And the increased use, that same survey that I referenced earlier, I think it said something to the effect of, by the year 2028, those same 3,000 plus that they interviewed had said that they foresee about 40% of the types of work that they're doing being done by AI. And so you're going to have to understand how to use AI. And even in, because I mentioned before, the legalese that I love so much, a lot of law schools are requiring students to, unlike years ago when the attorney had used ChatGPT to go into court with his case, or any of us, I tried to create a lesson plan just out of curiosity to see. I said, I really need this to be a great lesson for my students, engaging. I need some videos and articles. And I listed all of these different things, and it gave, oh, right, I'm on this. I'll make this perfect for you. And then it gave me some resources that are usually legit, like PBS, BBC. And then I clicked on them, non existent, weren't there, looked good on in print, but not there at all. And so it's been interesting to see the progression of all the resources available. But for anybody that's thinking about it, like, we can all do this because there are resources, like with, if you go to Learning Genie and I dropped it into the comments on each of the platforms, and it will be shared with the resources as well whenever I send that out to everybody. And that is, free. There it is again. And I've gone through it. I've shared it. I've created with it. And Kyle, go back to you to see, is there anything else that you would like to share or talk about relevant to, information, insights, experiences that you've had recently, conversations that you've had that tie into, AI literacy, that might, inspire people, or be like that one thing they need to hear, like, yes, I'm ready. I'm going to dive in. Like, I was hesitant, but.
So I think it's having the freedom to play. So
Mhm,
one of the things that we're seeing is, and I don't know how many of you may remember this, but there was a written work back about 20 years ago talking about digital natives and digital immigrants. And so we're the talk how the students that we had were digital natives, and that most of the teachers were digital immigrants, and it was tougher for them to learn some of these things. And I felt like that article kind of gave a whole generation of teachers an out not to kind of dig in.
mhm,
But now what we're seeing is we're kind of seeing the Gen X students are now our teachers. And some of them have learned how to use the technology pretty well, but others are very much just personal technology users. But what you need to realize is that we have a next generation of students that have all grown up with AI, and
mhm,
that they're used to that. And so I think we need to kind of look at that and move forward a little bit and say, okay, how am I going to reach these students? And it may be learning how to engage with these tools in such a way that our students that are comfortable with these tools, that they can now connect at a deeper level with the teachers. And so I think it is incumbent upon teachers to kind of make that effort, right?
mhm,
To kind of dip their toe in the water. And they don't have to be proficient in everything. And same thing with when I talk with teachers about tech integration, is that
mhm.
find that one thing that works for you. Find that one process that works for you. And one of the ways that I illustrate this to teachers is as I talk about a Vegas buffet. So you go to Vegas, you go to the buffet. If
Mhm.
you take a bite of something and you don't like it, I don't go back there. If I
Yeah,
find a bite of something that I like, I go back for seconds. And
right.
it's the same thing with tech tools and AI tools. If you find a tool that you like, keep going back, and then you want to look at scaling and how many different ways can you use that across your curriculum. Because
Mhm,
as you use it more and more frequently, your ability to change and to add more things, kind of that same cooking analogy, I can start
mhm.
to salt and pepper to taste and do those things, and that's what's going to allow you to grow.
Right. I like I've heard some great analogies in this week, and ironically, they've all involved relating to food or diet, especially like digital wellness and talking about being on like this digital diet. But you're right. Like, there's other options that are out there, but you just have to start. And I know for me, people always say, well, I always ask too, like, if you have last words or some, tips or advice to give somebody. One thing I think is, the humans are still in it. But you mentioned, 20 years ago, something being written, and I've heard this often too, is like, we have to stop preparing students for the world that we grew up in, because the world that I grew up in didn't have a lot of the technology. We are preparing them for a world that is already fully surrounded by technology, and this intelligence is AI in this case, is continuing to grow and expand. And AI literacy, it's not an option. It's another one of those skills. So if we're still saying 21st century skills, the C's, however we refer to them, but it is a foundational skill that they need to, you're not going to be an expert necessarily, but that is how they're going to be successful in whatever is coming down the road. And so as educators, I think, our work is it never gets easier the longer you've been in education. And for a while, it probably felt a little bit scary, or not really sure what to do. But I also look at it, I always say possibilities and responsibilities. And when it comes down to it, just like I feel like we go in waves, it's almost like a roller coaster ride, right? We go back to, oh, there's calculators, oh, there's Google, Wikipedia, and then we were virtual learning. But every single time we've had something like that, and then ChatGPT to adjust, it opened up a lot of other possibilities. And I say there's possibilities and the responsibilities, but the thing that connects all of this is we have to have a strong pedagogical focus. Um, Talking about AI, responsible AI use. And then my favorite word is thrive. I always said we want to create opportunities where students can thrive. But I said this last week when I was speaking, is that in all that we do, the like commonality between everything is like it's the relationships in everything. So with AI, if you're not sure about where to begin, if you're not sure what's the right tool, if you're not sure how to start at an early level, you build the relationships with colleagues, you get to learn from students. Like I love learning from students. Like they catch on to things so quickly, you don't have to worry about it. And they thrive on that as well, because they're teaching us too. And so it's a world full of opportunities and possibilities. But with AI, it's good. And in this case, like we mentioned, with these literacy lessons available with Learning Genie. And if you go into Learning Genie and you get into the curriculum Genie, you will get that whole wow factor again. I created some things about digital wellness just to share, and everybody was like, wow, this is amazing. And so you just do one thing at a time. That's all you have to do. And like you said, the salt and pepper, or you go back to the buffet, get something different. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just trying it, but understanding it, but also being mindful of things that are important, like the ethics of it, the data privacy, what's happening with the information, really evaluating it. And I will say, if you want somebody to read the legalese, just send it to me, because I really do enjoy reading all of that and evaluating it, because we want to make sure we keep ourselves, our students, the families, anybody that's using any of these tools safe, and also be prepared for whatever comes in the future when they have to use some of the tools. So, Kyle, I'm going to give you the last words as we wrap up here. We've had a lot of people joining in today. I
Yeah,
see all of the numbers. So,
yeah.
any other final words you'd like to share with anybody?
So my thing is, I'm just going to reiterate what I mentioned before, which is find a tool you like, try a bunch of different tools, try try learning Genie, try putting things into ChatGPT, try putting things into Gemini, and see what kind of different responses you get. You'll find
Mhm.
different things, but then try it, be very specific. I mean, I mean, in order to get anything of value from any kind of AI tool, you really need to be specific, right? And you kind of have to, be like the Spice Girls, like tell me what you want, what you really, really want, kind of thing, right? And so, but that's AI tools work that way. You have to
Yeah,
tell it. You have to be very specific, right? And once you do that, you'll find that the results you get back from the AI tool are going to be much better. You're still always going to have to check them. You're always going to have to validate them,
right.
but you're going to find that the responses and the content you get back is going to be much closer to what you want.
And I will say, Kyle, if I am singing that song in my head for the next week, it's echoing already. But that's good stuff. But I mean, you were talking about salt and pepper before, so it's all good. Although I could go back to salt and pepper. My mother who was watching would start cracking up and going to a flashback to that. But I do appreciate having you join me in this conversation today. And for everybody who's been watching, I've seen some comments, I've seen the numbers coming in. And for those of you that will watch us later, feel free to connect with Kyle or myself. I will make sure that when I send the recording, I have all the resources linked so you can check out those literacy lessons available for K through 12. Again, they are for free. Then you can dive in and do some creating and just see the power of AI and how you can use it in your whatever your role is to enhance learning for students, to save you some time, to give you that time back to work with your students, to work with your colleagues, because I think that's really what a big benefit is, not to replace relationships, but just to give you some time back to more meaningfully engage in the work that you are doing. And so a big thank you to everyone who's joined in. Kyle, huge thanks to you. Uh, Appreciate you being here.
Thank you very much for having me. I mean, I really enjoyed this quite a bit.
Yeah, me as well. And thanks to Learning Genie for all the awesome resources and bringing Kyle and I together here tonight to talk with all of you. So be sure to check out everything that is coming your way. And if you missed anything, go back and hit rewind. We've had a great time talking tonight, and we will share things as soon as we can. So have a great rest of your evening or morning, because wherever you're joining us from, it might be the future. So thanks, everyone, and we will catch you the next time.